My wife lied about my savings to buy her vacation. After I paid off our house, I cut her out and took everything. I'm a 31-year-old guy, and for most of my marriage, I believed love meant being the calm, reliable foundation no matter how much pressure it put on me. I met my wife during a chaotic period of her life. She'd just switched jobs, her career was uncertain, and she was juggling deadlines that made her more stressed than she'd admit. I remember the first few months vividly. I would get up early, make coffee, check bills, and make sure our apartment was sorted before she even rolled out of bed. She looked at me once and said, "I don't know what I'd do without you," and I believed it with every fiber of my being. From the start, I took on more than I should have. Mortgage payments, utilities, groceries, even unexpected emergencies, I quietly handled them all while she focused entirely on her career. I'd stay up late, balancing spreadsheets, making calls to fix leaks, arranging repairs, and juggling unexpected costs. I told myself this was temporary, that supporting her while she found her footing was part of a partnership. And she always called it that too, temporary teamwork, we're investing in our shared future. Friends often praised my dedication. "You're a rock, man," they'd say, and I'd shrug, trying not to feel proud yet secretly loving the validation. I wore it like armor, convincing myself that being dependable, responsible, and selfless was exactly what love demanded. Nights when the apartment was quiet, I'd sit alone, exhausted, wondering if she ever realized how much I was carrying, not just bills, but the emotional weight of keeping everything afloat. And yet, somewhere in the back of my mind, a tiny voice whispered doubts I refused to acknowledge. Sometimes she'd make decisions without asking me, or hint that I overthink things, and I'd laugh it off. I told myself it was normal, part of being married, part of giving her space. But a seed of unease started to grow, faint but persistent, as if the very trust one was building might quietly be turning into one-sided dependence. I remember one night in particular, sitting on the couch, papers scattered around me, and I realized I hadn't seen her check the bills in weeks. I wanted to mention it, but a strange hesitation stopped me. Something told me that what I thought was a partnership might not survive scrutiny. And in that moment, I couldn't shake the feeling that something I couldn't yet see was quietly shifting the balance of power. Over the years, I worked more hours than I cared to admit, sometimes 60, 70, even 80 hours a week, just to make sure the house was paid off early, the bills never missed, and we had some semblance of stability. She seemed to glide through life effortlessly, her days packed with work meetings, networking events, and occasional indulgent outings that I quietly financed. I remember the first time I realized how much I was covering, a spontaneous weekend trip she had planned with friends, which nearly wiped out the buffer I'd painstakingly built for emergencies. When I asked her about it, she smiled sheepishly. "I thought it was okay, since it's our money." I swallowed the irritation and reminded myself, it's fine. It's temporary. It's love. At dinner, I'd often catch her scrolling through her phone, sharing laughs with colleagues while I calculated the months ahead in my head, making sure nothing would slip. The tension grew silently between us. It wasn't loud arguments or screaming matches, just the quiet awareness that I was carrying more than she ever seemed to notice. "You always worry too much," she said one night, brushing off my concern about overdraft alerts. I nodded, forcing a laugh, but my chest tightened with frustration. Even small comments from friends, "You're doing too much for her, man," would sting, yet I kept believing that this was exactly what marriage meant, sacrifice without recognition. I began noticing little inconsistencies. Receipts left in drawers, unaccounted for purchases, casual dismissals of questions I asked about money, things that seemed minor but slowly accumulated into a nagging sense of betrayal. It was like watching a storm gather quietly on the horizon. I couldn't see the first lightning strike, but I knew it was coming. My nights became restless, the hum of the fridge and the creak of floorboards in the apartment echoing the growing tension. I felt trapped in a life I had built for both of us, my own needs quietly sidelined. The worst part was convincing myself it was normal, that love required endurance, that this was temporary and I'd be rewarded with shared security eventually. Yet, Somewhere between balancing spreadsheets and listening to her excitedly recount her day, the doubt began to feel more like a warning. Something was off, subtle, almost imperceptible, but it planted a seed I couldn't ignore. And I couldn't shake the feeling that the storm waiting on the horizon might not be just about money. It all came crashing down the day I checked our joint account and realized a huge chunk of my savings was gone, completely gone. My stomach dropped, a cold wave of panic washing over me as I stared at the screen. The numbers didn't make sense at first, and I double-checked, thinking maybe I'd misread something. But no, there it was. Tens of thousands of dollars vanished, spent on what? That's when I saw the charges, an extravagant vacation she had booked for herself, flights, resorts, even luxury excursions I didn't approve. My hands shook as I dialed her number, my mind racing with disbelief and anger. "Why didn't you tell me about this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm, but it cracked anyway. "Oh, I thought it was fine," she said lightly, as if we were discussing dinner plans rather than financial betrayal. "We're married, aren't we? I thought we could share it." I felt a sharp sting of betrayal that went beyond money. This wasn't a one-time mistake, it was a blatant disregard for trust, for everything I had worked so hard to secure. I remember pacing the apartment, the hum of the air conditioner deafening in the silence, every shadow on the walls magnifying the heaviness in my chest. The smell of coffee lingering from the morning suddenly felt suffocating, the comfort of my home turning into a cage. I tried to reason with her, to understand why she thought this was acceptable, but every explanation only made the wound deeper. Friends had warned me before, casually, in passing, "You're too nice, too dependable. Don't let her walk over you." I'd laughed it off then, unwilling to believe someone I loved could intentionally exploit me. But seeing it in black and white, digits on a screen that were supposed to represent our shared future, I realized I had been blind. My trust, my sacrifices, my late nights, all weaponized against me without a second thought. And in that moment, as I sank onto the couch, staring at the ceiling, I knew this was the first real fracture in our marriage. Something had shifted irrevocably, and I had no idea how deep the damage went. After that day, I couldn't stop myself from looking closer at everything, old statements, receipts, and account histories I had never thought to question before. I started piecing together the puzzle, and what I found made my head spin. It wasn't just the vacation, there were repeated withdrawals, unexplained transfers, small but significant amounts that had quietly disappeared over months. Every time I confronted her, she would sigh, roll her eyes, or dismiss me. "You worry too much," she said, her tone sharp, almost amused. But I knew what I saw with my own eyes, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. I remember one evening, the apartment dim except for the glow of the kitchen light, as I laid out all the evidence on the counter. "Why didn't you ever tell me about these?" I asked, my voice tight, the weight of betrayal pressing down on my chest. She shrugged, leaning against the fridge, scrolling her phone, like it was nothing. "I thought you'd understand," she muttered, but her eyes avoided mine. Every word felt like a dagger. Every excuse, a confirmation that the partnership I had believed in was unraveling. I began replaying years of our marriage, trying to find the first sign, the first time she had crossed the line. I remembered nights I stayed up, working overtime, keeping the house afloat, while she spent without a second thought. I remembered the casual dismissals, the "it's fine" after surprise bills, the way my concerns were painted as paranoia. It all added up now, and the realization hit me like a punch: this wasn't carelessness. It was a pattern. I felt a mixture of anger, heartbreak, and utter disbelief. The apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a stage for deception, every familiar object a reminder of her manipulation. And yet, beneath the fury, a new thought began to form: if she could do this so casually, there was no limit to what she might have hidden. I knew I couldn't just sit here and wait for the next betrayal. Something had to change, and fast. The first true doubt about our marriage settled deep in my chest, and I realized, with a sinking feeling, that the life I thought we shared might never have been real at all. It was during one late night, sifting through old emails and digital statements, that I stumbled upon something that made my heart stop. Hidden accounts. Multiple, unlisted accounts she had opened without my knowledge, transfers I hadn't authorized, money disappearing in ways I hadn't even imagined. My hands shook as I scrolled, staring at transactions that made no sense, luxury hotels, airline tickets, expensive shopping sprees, all meticulously concealed. I felt a cold, sinking pit in my stomach, realizing that this wasn't just reckless behavior or carelessness. It was intentional. And for the first time, I understood the full scale of her deception. I confronted her immediately, my voice cracking despite my attempt at calm. "Why do you have hidden accounts? Where did all that money go?" I demanded, pacing the living room, the hum of the fridge loud in the otherwise silent apartment. She looked at me with a shrug, as if it were trivial. "I didn't think it was a big deal," she said, eyes darting away. My chest tightened. Every ounce of trust, every sacrifice, every late night I spent holding our life together, it all felt like it had been weaponized against me. I remember pacing, my mind racing. How could I have missed all the signs? The careful dismissals, the excuses, the casual laughter when I questioned small expenses, everything now made sense. I realized that my marriage had been a house of cards, built on illusions, and I had been blind to the cracks. My anger simmered alongside a deep, gnawing sadness that left me almost paralyzed. That night, I sat on the couch, the city lights casting shadows across the floor, and I realized the midpoint had arrived. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about control, manipulation, and betrayal on a scale I had never anticipated. And I knew, with a clarity that frightened me, that things could never return to the way they were. The life I thought we shared had fractured completely, and I had no idea how deep the damage ran. The next morning, I decided I had to confront her fully, armed with every piece of evidence I could gather. My hands were still trembling as I laid the papers and screenshots across the kitchen table, the soft hum of the refrigerator echoing like a countdown. "We need to talk. Now," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, though the anger under the surface was boiling. She looked at the pile of documents, blinked, and then, almost casually, said, "You're making a big deal out of nothing." I didn't do anything wrong. My chest tightened. The audacity left me momentarily speechless. I didn't do anything wrong. I repeated, incredulous, as my voice rose. "These hidden accounts, the transfers, the vacations you bought without telling me, how is that nothing?" Her eyes flicked away, and she tried to laugh it off, brushing her hair behind her ear. "You're overreacting. Why do you always turn everything into a fight?" she said. But I could feel the calm facade she was putting on cracking, and it made me angrier. Every word felt like salt in a wound that was already raw and bleeding. I remember the apartment feeling smaller that day, the sunlight streaming through the blinds seeming almost accusing. The air was thick with tension, and the smell of her perfume, which I once found comforting, now felt suffocating. I realized in that moment that nothing I said could make her see the magnitude of what she had done. This wasn't a mistake or carelessness, it was a pattern of control, and she wasn't going to stop on her own. I felt a strange mixture of heartbreak and clarity. The person I had trusted most was now the source of my deepest betrayal, and I knew that if I didn't act, the consequences would only grow. That confrontation, rather than bringing answers or closure, left me standing in the middle of our kitchen, staring at her, realizing how far this had already gone, and how far it could go if I didn't decide my next move carefully. The weeks that followed were hell. Living under the same roof as her, I felt trapped in my own life, every glance and word a reminder of the betrayal I'd uncovered. Nights were the worst, sleep eluded me, my mind spinning with calculations, memories, and questions I couldn't answer. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, the faint hum of traffic outside mixing with the distant buzz of the fridge, feeling like my sanctuary had turned into a prison. Every room in the apartment felt smaller, every object a trigger, a wine glass she used to toast her reckless purchases, the couch where we'd once laughed, now a symbol of deceit. I started questioning everything, every shared moment, every gesture, every promise she had made over the years. "Why are you so upset?" she asked casually one evening, as if I were overreacting again. Her words cut deeper than any accusation could. I wanted to scream, to shake her, to make her understand the depth of my betrayal, but I couldn't. I felt powerless, humiliated, like every ounce of trust I'd ever had been stolen. Friends noticed the change in me, they asked if I was okay, but I couldn't fully explain the mix of anger, grief, and exhaustion that weighed on me. It was like walking through life in a fog, knowing something was horribly wrong but unsure how to fix it. I started avoiding her, retreating into myself, counting bills and statements over and over, searching for the next hidden move she might make. The apartment, once a place of comfort, now felt like a chessboard where every move had consequences I couldn't control. I realized I couldn't continue like this without losing myself completely. I was at my lowest point, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually, and I knew that if I didn't make a decision soon, I'd be trapped in this betrayal forever. And in that darkness, a single thought began to crystallize: if she could manipulate me so easily, I had to take control, or risk losing everything I had worked so hard to build. After days of sleepless nights and endless pacing, I realized I couldn't keep living like this. I needed a plan, a way to protect myself and reclaim control over my life, and my finances, without letting her know. I started quietly separating our accounts, moving funds into ones only I could access, making sure there was no chance she could interfere. Every step felt both liberating and terrifying. I had never imagined taking such decisive action against someone I loved. I documented everything: emails, bank statements, receipts, turning every lie, every hidden transaction into evidence I could rely on if it came to a legal battle. I remember sitting at my desk one night, the apartment silent except for the faint hum of the streetlights outside, feeling a strange mixture of fear and exhilaration. "I can't keep being blind," I whispered to myself, running my hands through my hair. It was empowering to know I was finally taking steps to safeguard my life, but also horrifying to realize how much deceit had been happening under my nose. I started laying out potential scenarios, imagining conversations, and rehearsing responses to her inevitable questions. The weight of betrayal was still there, but for the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of control. She began noticing subtle changes, small boundaries I was setting without announcing them. "Why are you suddenly so secretive about everything?" she asked one evening, raising an eyebrow as she noticed the quiet shift in our routines. I said nothing, letting the silence answer her question, and in that quiet, I felt the power slowly start to tilt back in my favor. Every small action was a step toward reclaiming what had been mine, toward protecting my future. And though tension lingered in every corner of our apartment, I could feel the first sparks of hope that maybe I could finally end this cycle. But I also knew that the real test was yet to come, and the next move would have to be precise. The quiet reclamation of my life began to feel like a game of chess, each move deliberate, calculated, and necessary. I finalized the separation of our finances, making sure she could no longer access any of my savings, while keeping the appearance of normalcy. I remember the nervous thrill as I transferred the last of the funds into secure accounts, knowing that every dollar she had tried to manipulate was now out of her reach. There was a strange satisfaction in reclaiming what was rightfully mine, but it was tempered by the bitter reality of what had led me here. The apartment, once suffocating with tension, now seemed like neutral ground, a space I controlled rather than one she dominated. She began to notice the changes, though she didn't understand the full extent. "Why are you acting so differently?" she asked one evening, her voice a mix of suspicion and irritation. I didn't answer, letting the silence speak volumes. Every boundary I had set, every move to protect myself, was invisible yet undeniable, and it gave me a quiet sense of triumph. I could feel the power shifting, slowly but surely, back into my hands. Friends could sense the change too. "You seem more yourself," one remarked, noting the confidence I had reclaimed. I smiled faintly, aware that this was just the beginning. It felt good to know that while she had tried to manipulate and deceive, I was no longer a pawn in her game. Each step I took reinforced the lesson I had learned painfully: trust can be broken, but control can be regained. And yet, I knew the ultimate confrontation was still ahead, the moment when I would have to fully sever the ties that bound us. The thought both scared and thrilled me, because I knew that once I acted, nothing would ever be the same again. The day finally came when I decided there would be no more compromises. I calmly told her, "We need to talk about our finances and our future," though inside, my chest was tight with a mixture of fear and resolve. She looked at me, curious but unsuspecting, expecting perhaps another minor argument she could brush off. I laid it all out, the hidden accounts, the vacations, the transfers, every breach of trust meticulously documented. Her face shifted from casual indifference to shock, and then to panic, as if she had just realized I wasn't bluffing. I didn't think it was that serious," she stammered, trying to regain composure, but the fear in her eyes betrayed her. I shook my head, steady now, more certain than ever. "It's more than serious. It's over. I've secured our finances, and this ends here." Every word felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I hadn't realized had been missing for years. The apartment felt lighter, as if the tension that had weighed down every corner for so long was finally lifting. Her pleas came next, begging, bargaining, trying to twist the story into something that made her look like the victim. But I was calm, unwavering. The empowerment I felt from reclaiming control was intoxicating, and I refused to let her manipulate me again. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't scared of her, or of losing her. The scales had shifted, and it was clear who held the power. And yet, as I watched her leave the room, face pale and words fumbling, I knew that this wasn't just about money or control, it was about finally ending a cycle of betrayal that had haunted me for years. The final confrontation had happened, but the emotional closure was only just beginning. Once she was gone, I finally felt the first breath of freedom I'd taken for granted all those years. The apartment, once a stage for tension and deceit, now felt like a place I could reclaim as my own. I started focusing on myself, investing time in my work, my hobbies, and the little things I had neglected while managing the fallout of her betrayals. I noticed a subtle but profound shift in my confidence. I walked taller, spoke more clearly, and no longer hesitated to assert my boundaries. Friends commented on it too. "You're different now. Stronger. Happier." I just nodded, because they couldn't know how hard I had fought to get to this point, how painstaking each step had been. I spent time reflecting on the marriage, replaying the betrayals, and realizing that my love and sacrifices had been genuine, even if they weren't reciprocated. There was sadness, of course, the loss of what I had believed could have been a shared life, but it was tempered by relief and clarity. I felt empowered by the knowledge that I had navigated the deception with patience and strategy, taking control when it mattered most. Every dollar, every decision, every careful step I had taken to protect myself was a testament to my resilience. Even ordinary routines felt meaningful again, making coffee without anxiety, checking emails without dread, or simply walking through the apartment knowing that nothing could surprise me anymore. I knew I had regained my life in a way that was deeper than financial security. I had reclaimed my sense of self. And though the memories of her manipulation still lingered like faint shadows, they no longer held power over me. But the final closure, the ultimate payoff of all this effort, was still ahead, the moment where I would finally see that justice, subtle yet complete, had been achieved. I just didn't know yet how satisfying that revelation would feel. The final piece of this long, painful puzzle fell into place quietly, almost ironically. I retained full control of our finances, my house, and my future, while she no longer had access to anything she had tried to manipulate. I remember sitting in the living room one evening, the golden light of sunset streaming through the blinds, feeling a strange mix of relief, pride, and vindication. It wasn't about revenge in the traditional sense, there was no need for public confrontation or dramatic gestures, but the satisfaction was profound. Every betrayal, every hidden transaction, every sleepless night had led to this moment of quiet justice. I finally understood that empowerment wasn't loud, it was strategic, deliberate, and unwavering. Friends and family who had witnessed my struggle were astounded by the turnaround. "I've never seen you so calm and certain," one said, and I smiled, knowing they didn't fully grasp the battles that had been fought behind the scenes. I reflected on what I had learned about trust, boundaries, and the value of self-respect. I had rebuilt my life on my terms, investing in my future, reclaiming my dignity, and ensuring that nothing could jeopardize my stability again. The apartment, once heavy with deceit, now felt warm and welcoming, a symbol of the life I had painstakingly reclaimed. Looking back, I realized that this ordeal had not broken me, it had strengthened me. I had learned to spot manipulation, to act decisively, and to prioritize my well-being above the false sense of duty that had once trapped me. I had survived betrayal at the hands of someone I trusted most, and in doing so, I had emerged stronger, wiser, and finally free. As the evening light faded, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The storm was over, the debt of deception repaid, not with vengeance, but with clarity, control, and the quiet power of someone who refuses to be victimized again. I knew that, for the first time in years, I was truly home in my own life.